things have changed, right? From the days I learned to edit videotape with a pen and a stopwatch, and to edit 16mm film with a moviola. And from those days, when activists used to produce printed newsletters on a Gestetner, and maybe 200 of those copies would go out, well, we'd lick the stamps, put them in the envelopes, run down to the post office, and try to get the preferred rate down at the post office. One thing that's not changed is the difference between news. That hasn't changed. Magazines like The Last Post, Canadian Dimension, and this magazine is about schools, I.F. Stone's Weekly, The Nation, and Ramparts became famous among an elite section of the population. Why? Because they did the digging and told a nearly completely different story than was what was in the mainstream press. So in effect, it was really only marginally significant that the newspapers have been cut and the stories have been reduced even further. The stories I want to read never really been to a large degree in the mainstream corporate controlled press anyway. We should put the stake in the heart right now that yes, it's getting worse, but let's face it, it was never good. The media has been controlled by corporate interests and served their interests for a very long time, suppressing the real news. You know, I actually have no education to be a real estate entrepreneur, although I run a development company and a mezzanine finance fund. My education is actually as a highly trained media person, a filmmaker who took relevant subjects in order to learn how to transform society using the most powerful tools there are, the media. That's my background, political economy, conception and production of media products, along with a good dose of educational curriculum development. Yes, friends, I'm here today to tell you that many of us who went into the media for those reasons still want to transform society using media education. And while I'm unemployed in the field, and despite the fact I never got a real job at the CBC or the NFB, just little old contracts without benefits, many of us have never given up, and we're not defeated. And you know, if you would mind, a glass of water for me there.
Any strategies?
Yeah, we'll get to it. You know, what I could have done back in the mid-70s and early 80s with the great education I got was worked on Grade C, Hollywood schlock, that I never would have wanted to watch in the first place. And after working my craft for a short time, I soon discovered the chosen trade documentary film had no place in television, and there was literally no way to distribute the films. There was no way to get to the public, no matter how earth-shaking the news. Furthermore, what I had to say was not acceptable in the mainstream media, and they were not going to air it or finance it, no matter how professionally it was produced or how hard-hitting the films were. And the situation is not that much different today, save and except the internet, and a few very specialized programs that have come and gone over time. Everyone here knows what the reasons we have, the economic system we do, and capitalism is able to maintain itself. Is because the media has told the working class that what they have is good for them and sold them a bill of goods. And they continue to do so today, day after day. The voices that question the system or examine the underpinnings are suppressed and screened out of the mass media, as they've always been. This is not a new story. In the early 70s, I was around the NFB Challenge for Change program, which started Metro Media Television for activists there, and we organized in Vancouver. At a time, my fellow activists and myself appeared before the CRTC to try and persuade them to cut the cable television funds loose from the cable companies so that a station and content could be created which was independent of the cable companies themselves. At that time, I believe after much organizing, we got about 25 people out to the CRTC hearings. I mean, let's face it, is there anything more boring than CRTC hearings? But is there anything more fundamental to how the whole system maintains itself? No, and most of us in this room know it. If I'm not mistaken, the funds we were going after in the 70s to create an independent station are the same funds that the cable companies now have in their control, which now total about $100 million. And you know, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of Steve Anderson, who's been leading the fight at the CRTC. Steve, if you're in the room, I wouldn't mind if you'd stand up so people know who you are back there. Steve is a person who's prepared to give up one of those real jobs Lise was talking about last night and lead the open media, essentially without funding. I can tell you for sure his salary does not even approach minimum wage. Yet he's leading one of the most important fights of the last 50 years in terms of media policy. That is internet throttling. Since the creation of open media, CA, they had 12,000 people write the CRTC in contrast to the 25 people we could get out to keep the internet open. So let's have a hand for a person who's prepared to stand up for what he believes in and forego middle-class life. Because without the open internet, it's going back to the Gestetner and stamp licking and parties and the bad old days. Watch the forces of control at the CRTC. They will allow it to be throttled step by step, and they know full well the power of the open internet. This will not let the force of democracy get any more of a toehold than they already have on the internet unless we, the citizens, organize smartly to do something to stop them. Which brings me to smart change and why I'm here. I mean, let's face it, they've not asked me here to come all the way to tell you about my mother's asshole. Many people in the room know communications firm Burst & Marsteller. Well, for those of you who don't, when Exxon Valdez ran aground and Union Carbide had a spill at Bhopal, who did they call? Burst & Marsteller, the world's premier public relations firm, to spin the story. Why? Because they know how to spin a story and create false consciousness. Smart change is just the opposite kind of organization. We're committed to taking the tools of communication, of story, of curriculum development, and the skills of community organizing, and weave them together to build a mass social movement which will kick the capitalists out and their foot servants out of power. We will do it, well, I can tell you one thing, we're not going to start with $50 million. We don't have a budget like Exxon, and we're not going to do it alone. We need you, the hundreds more like you. Did you know that 3,500 votes in the swing ridings in British Columbia in the last election separated the NDP from the Liberals? And it's been a small margin since almost every election since 1975. The fact is the brains in the room and in this country are equal, if not better, than any of those that can assemble, that you could assemble at Burst & Marsteller. So now consider yourself all on retainer at $300 an hour. The forces of progress in this country inform, come to your Bay Street office. Imagine you're sitting in the boardroom. And they say, what can we do? We're getting our butts kicked out due to capitalism as organized society and control the media. Can you communications professionals and educators help us figure out what to do about the situation we find ourselves in? We want to create a more just and egalitarian society, a society that works in the interest of the people, not in the interest of capital. That is essentially what smart change is about. What can we as a media education professionals do on different fronts to help civil society solve the communications problems that keep perpetuating the economic system we are now forced to endure under a government that actually represents a very small percentage of the population? Now, if you think I'm going to try and answer that question in my remaining 30 seconds, you'll know I'm certifiably nuts. How we're not being that crazy, like all good storytellers, this talk is another episode. Come to dinner and cocktails with us tomorrow night at the Soulage School of Business, because many of us in this room have been talking about putting on an activist media conference for more than a year so that we can carry on this very important dialogue that has been started here. We'll be forming a committee to put on another activist conference of media professionals and civil society. There's a sign-up sheet in the hall. Or if you cannot make the dinner, see us at the table out front, or Sunday come to Scattingport, where we're doing a public presentation of many of the people producing alternative media. If I have to raise it how we're going about it, and building the biggest social movement in this country has ever seen, and it's only going to cost you a few bucks. So come on out and meet us better. Look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you, Michael.